They said the orphanage closed after a fire, but the records never stopped breathing. Somewhere in those hills, between mercy and memory, Street Elora's still whispers the names that were never crossed out. The road to Street Elora's is not on most maps. It winds through the hills of rural Pennsylvania, where the trees lean too close and the air smells of rust and rain. At the end of that forgotten path stands a gate, its bars split with rust, its hinges frozen in place. Behind it, the orphanage rises in fragments, walls of weathered brick, windows clouded with decades of dust, the faint outline of a bell tower now half collapsed. When the documentary begins, the footage trembles as if the camera itself were afraid to draw too near. The narrator's voice cuts through the static-like memory surfacing from water. They tell us that this was once a place of charity, a home for the lost, the abandoned, the unnamed. But in time, it became something else, a house of whispers and of silence so complete it began to feel alive. Locals still call it Street Elora's home for foundlings, though no one has lived there for 70 years. Children in nearby towns dare each other to touch the gate at night, claiming they can hear footsteps on the other side. Old men at the diner speak of lights in the windows, though no electricity has run through the building since the early 1950s. When asked why no one tears it down, the answer is always the same. Asterisk, because you can't tear down what hasn't finished yet. Asterisk, the camera lingers on the sign half buried in weeds. Asterisk Street, Elora's Orphanage, 1931. Asterisk. The paint has peeled away, but the words "times in God's hands," times remain legible, an irony the narrator does not have to explain. They said the orphanage closed after a fire. That's what the county records claim, though there are no photographs of any blaze, no insurance filings, no reconstruction permits. The local paper for that week is missing from archives altogether. The only surviving documentation is a state order stamped sealed in thick black ink. No explanation. No signatures beyond a single initial, W. The narrator pauses here, letting the sound of wind and distant thunder fill the silence. The camera pans toward the windows, dark rectangles where light once lived. A curtain moves, though no one stands behind it. Those who still remember say that Street Elora's never truly closed. It was only abandoned. They say the children were taken away before dawn, their names struck from records, their faces from photographs. Some insist that on certain nights, if the fog sits low across the hills, you can hear a bell ringing from the old tower 3 chimes, always 3, but the tower's bell was removed in 1949. The documentary does not try to convince the viewer of what is true or what is legend. It only asks one question as the shot fades to black. Asterisk. If there was no fire, what was sealed? Asterisk. The next scene opens in darkness, broken only by the narrow beam of a flashlight cutting across dust and paper. The camera trembles as it follows 2 researchers through a basement corridor, their breaths visible in the cold. The walls drip with moisture, lined with shelves that bow under the weight of forgotten records. They call it the ledger room. Once, it was where the staff of Street Elora's kept meticulous accounts of every loaf of bread, every blanket, every child. Now it feels like a crypt, each page a headstone. The air is thick, heavy with mold and something older, something that smells faintly of iron and time. The narrator speaks softly, as if not to disturb what sleeps there. Paper, they say, is more patient than people. It keeps what memory chooses to forget. The first ledger they open is dated 1932. The handwriting is precise, almost elegant. Names written in careful ink: Thomas, Rebecca, Samuel, Anna, each assigned a number. Across from them, tallies of food rations, linens, shoes, every detail accounted for as if the children were inventory rather than souls. The researchers turn the pages slowly, their gloves leaving faint trails in the dust. As the camera zooms in, the tone of the documentary begins to shift. The ledgers grow stranger with each year. By the late 1940s, the handwriting changes shakier, rushed. Entire lines are crossed out, names replaced by numbers, numbers replaced by blanks. One page lists 22 children. The next, only 19. In the margins, the words asterisk adjusted accordingly. Asterisk, no explanation follows. When they reach the final ledger, its spine cracks under pressure. The paper inside is brittle, yellowed, eaten by damp. Yet one entry remains fresh as though written yesterday. It is the last page, dated without year, and the ink is red, not black. The camera lingers on the words, trembling slightly in the light. Asterisk. The trades will continue until the numbers are even. Asterisk. The phrase is repeated twice, the second time with a line drawn beneath it. Deep enough to tear the paper, the researchers exchange glances, unsure if they've stumbled onto bookkeeping or confession. One of them whispers, "Trades of what?" The other answers quietly, "Of who?" The narrator explains that no official documents ever mention trades or transfers. Yet the orphanage's population remained constant for nearly 20 years, never more, never less. Even during flu outbreaks, the count never changed. For every loss, the narrator says, there was a replacement. The shot widens, revealing that along the basement wall, beneath the ledgers, small chalk marks are carved into the brick rows of lines grouped in fives, the tally of something measured by hand. The light flickers. A faint sound echoes through the room, like a page turning itself. And for the first time, the documentary allows silence to linger longer than words, as if the building itself is waiting to be counted. The diary was found wrapped in a sheet of oilcloth, wedged behind a rotting desk in the orphanage's east wing. The pages were warped by damp and years of neglect, but the ink had survived brown now instead of black, its lines trembling across yellow paper. The cover bore no name, only the embossed initials times SEH asterisk, and a date stamped faintly on the inside flap. Asterisk asterisk 1947 asterisk asterisk. The first entries are plain, written in the calm, efficient tone of someone accustomed to duty. They speak of breakfast rations, attendance logs, laundry schedules. The children were restless today, one line reads. The cold has made them irritable. There is nothing yet to fear in these words until the handwriting begins to change. The narrator describes it carefully, the voice low and steady. At first, it is the diary of a caretaker, they say. By the end, it reads like the record of a witness. The entries begin to drift from routine into unease. Notes about supplies replaced by observations that feel confessional. Asterisk. There are fewer pears at mealtime. I must have miscounted. Or perhaps they moved them again. Asterisk. The word times pairs times repeats across several pages. No explanation follows. Entry Hashtwoofer mentions a night storm and a visit from the men upstairs. Entry Hashtwoofer describes children being gathered for inspection. They call them by numbers now, not names, the writer notes. It makes it easier, they said. For whom, I cannot say. By entry #27, the tone fractures entirely. The neat cursive deteriorates into a hurried scrawl. Asterisk, 2 pairs missing. No report, no noise. Beds cold but unrumpled. Told not to speak of it. Asterisk. The next few entries are smeared, as though the ink was dragged by a shaking hand. Then comes the one that changed everything. Entry #31. Only 5 words written clean and deliberate, as though the writer had rehearsed them before committing to the page. Asterisk. We traded Anna yesterday. Asterisk. Beneath it, a single line is drawn in pencil. Faint but intentional, like a barrier between that sentence and whatever came next. The documentary holds on that page for nearly 10 seconds, the camera unmoving. You can hear the faint buzz of the recording equipment, the soft exhale of one of the researchers as they read aloud. We traded Anna yesterday. No context, no reason, no record of to whom or for what, just a statement of fact. The narrator speaks again. After entry #31, the handwriting ceases. A new hand takes over, brief and unsteady. The remaining pages are blank, except for small stains near the bottom edge brown, circular, soaked through. Forensic testing later confirmed it wasn't ink. The pages close with a sound that feels heavier than paper, and the screen fades to black. The voice of the narrator remains. If Anna was traded, someone must have received her. But no records name her. Not in the orphanage. Not in the state archives. Not anywhere at all. The camera fades in on a photograph so old the edges crumble in the archivist's hands. A man stands in the center, framed by a group of pale-faced children. His expression is unreadable, neither kind nor cruel, merely watchful. His coat hangs to his knees, dark against the snow, and his wire-rimmed glasses catch a glint of light that obscures his eyes. The caption beneath the image reads, ****, Dr. Bernard Wexler, State Inspector, 1948, ***, but no state file ever lists such a man. No payroll, no correspondence, no credentials. Only this photograph, and a single mention in street. Elora's final ledger, Dr. Wexler begins his study today. The children have been selected, The narrator's tone hardens, the documentary shifting from curiosity to suspicion. He appeared when the rules began to change, they say. And when he left, Street Elora's would never open its doors again. Former residents, those few who survived long enough to speak, remember him differently. To some, he was gentle, a man who asked questions instead of giving orders. To others, he was a presence that made the air heavy, a shadow that followed them from room to room. One recalled his voice, calm and careful, always asking the same question. Do you still see her when you close your eyes? Another claimed he carried a small leather notebook and that every time a child cried, he would write something down and smile faintly, as though the sound pleased him. The diary recovered earlier mentions him only once, in a single vague sentence. The doctor insists the dreams are valuable. I do not agree. That entry is unsigned. From that date forward, the handwriting changes again, smaller, tighter, as if whoever wrote it began to fear being read. Photographs discovered in the attic show a new classroom built during Wexler's tenure, windows covered, desks bolted in rows, a mirror installed along the back wall. The children's reflections appear sharper than their bodies, their faces slightly misaligned, as if the glass remembered them differently. The narrator describes how, soon after Wexler's arrival, the orphanage's population records froze. Exactly 31 children, no more, no less. Adoption requests were halted without explanation. Visitors were turned away. A letter surfaced decades later, addressed to the Department of Welfare but never sent. The ink had bled from moisture, but 2 lines remained legible. Dr. Wexler's methods exceed the purpose of care. He says they must learn to trade what cannot be measured. In the final photograph, Wexler stands at the foot of the orphanage steps, the children lined behind him in perfect symmetry. Their faces are blank, identical in posture, their eyes fixed forward while his glance cuts slightly to the side as though someone just outside the frame had called his name. The camera lingers on that image, and the narrator whispers, "Every record of his existence ends here, yet every story that followed begins with him." The records from the winter of 1948 speak of a strange quiet settling over Street Elora's. The children who once filled the halls with hymns and laughter had grown subdued, their play replaced by long stretches of stillness. Teachers began writing complaints that no longer sounded like the grievances of overworked caretakers, but like warnings. One letter, written in careful cursive, reads, They whisper even when they sleep. I hear them through the walls. It is not the same voice that answers. Asterisk. The report was never filed with the state. Instead, it was tucked into a folder marked Times Behavioral Observations, Dr. Wexler. Asterisk. The camera follows the researchers as they unfold more of these papers, each one stained with damp, some written over with unfamiliar shorthand. The narrator's voice drops to a hush. It began with two girls, they say. Identical in appearance, though born to different parents, admitted 2 years apart. Photographs confirm the similarity: round faces, pale eyes, and a faint scar above the left eyebrow in both, as if one had been made in imitation of the other. Their names were Clara and Elise, but in the diary, the caretaker calls them Times the Echo Twins. Asterisk. At first, the girls simply finished each other's sentences, a parlor trick that amused visitors. But within months, their voices began overlapping, two tones weaving into one, indistinguishable from each other. Teachers swore they heard one speaking while the other's lips stayed still. During lessons, Clara would answer questions directed at Elise, and Elise would laugh before the joke was told. The children around them stopped sitting nearby, claiming that the twins hummed softly without moving their mouths, a low harmony that grew louder when they were separated. Entry #28 of the diary describes a night when the matron found both girls standing by the window in the dormitory, hands clasped, whispering in unison. Asterisk. She's coming back for her other face. Asterisk. Entry #30 notes that one of them refused to eat, insisting the other was full enough for both. Then, at entry #31, the one line that ends the diary, the words appear. Asterisk. We traded Anna yesterday. Asterisk. Scholars later noticed the same page includes a faint pencil sketch in the margin. Two girls drawn side by side, their hands joined, their faces blurred together. Beneath them, written smaller, almost hidden in the fold of the paper, asterisk. They speak as one now. Dr. Wexler says this is progress. Asterisk. After that entry, the twins vanish from every record. Their beds are reassigned, their ration lines erased, no adoption files, no death certificates, no transfers. Only the hollow echo of their presence remains mirrored in testimonies decades later from other surviving children who swore that when they prayed at night, a second voice always finished the prayer for them. The film holds on a final image. Two identical dresses folded on a cot, the camera panning slowly upward to the cracked mirror above. In the reflection, for a single frame, both dresses seem occupied. In the months following Dr. Wexler's arrival, the ledgers of Street Elora's began to change. The neat columns that once listed quantities of flour, soap, and milk now carried strange annotations in the margins, abbreviations that no clerk could later decipher, and symbols shaped like circles cut in half. The words asterisk trade day, asterisk, first appear in a 1949 entry beside a list of numbers, each line ending in the same cryptic note, asterisk, delivered. Asterisk. At first, the researchers assumed it referred to supply exchanges, donations, perhaps, or the bartering common in rural towns during shortages. But the longer they studied the records, the more the arithmetic refused to make sense. The food stocks dropped, the clothing inventory dwindled. And yet, the official headcount, meticulously recorded every month, never changed. 31 children. Always 31. The documentary's camera lingers on the old paper, the ink faded to a rusty brown, while the narrator's voice hovers in the dark. Something was being given away, they say, and something else was being received. The records show that on each trade day, a delivery wagon was signed in at the orphanage gates, time noted. Quantity marked, no sender listed. The same entry follows every visit. Asterisk. Received new pair. Asterisk. To anyone unfamiliar with the orphanage's methods, it would sound harmless. But the diary found in the basement gives context the ledgers never dared. One page, written in trembling ink, reads, asterisk. They came at dawn again. Dr. Wexler says the exchange must remain balanced. He watches as we line them up, one gone, one brought in. He never calls it loss. Asterisk. Former staff members interviewed years later struggled to recall details, or perhaps refused to. One caretaker, near 90 when she spoke, claimed the children who arrived after these exchanges were quiet, too quiet, and bore faint marks at the base of their skulls. Another said they spoke with unfamiliar accents, as if they had learned English from listening rather than being taught. One, she whispered, had eyes of two different colors, one gray, one black, and cried whenever bells rang from the chapel. The narrator allows a pause before continuing. Adoption files from this period vanish entirely. Not one form of release or transfer survives. The implication sharpens as the camera pans across a long wooden table in the orphanage's dining hall, its surface still scarred by initials carved decades ago. In the center of the table sits a brass plate etched faintly with words barely legible under the dust. Asterisk, to keep the balance. Asterisk. The phrase mirrors the one found in red ink at the end of the final ledger, tying the entries together like an unbroken ritual. The film cuts briefly to footage of the surrounding hills, fields stripped bare, a sky heavy with cloud. The narrator's tone lowers, almost mournful now. Whatever was traded, it was not counted by weight or measure. It was counted by breath. The page turns one last time, revealing the smallest notation scrawled in the corner of the book, perhaps an afterthought from a hand trembling with guilt. It reads, asterisk, all pairs accounted for, asterisk. Then the frame fades to black, leaving only the sound of distant footsteps on gravel, as if the trades were still continuing somewhere beyond the lens. The chapel at Street Elora's was the one part of the orphanage that time seemed unwilling to claim. Its steeple, though fractured, still cut a black silhouette against the hills. The film crew enters through its warped doors, and the sound of hinges echoes like a groan. Dust floats in the light from a single broken window, and for a moment, the room appears peaceful rows of benches, a cracked altar, the faint scent of candle wax long turned to dust. But the calm fractures when the narrator speaks. Beneath this chapel lies a corridor not found on any official record, though its outline appears faintly on the original blueprints. A passage labeled only as lower storage. The camera lowers into the basement, its beam tracing the contours of cold stone. The air grows heavy, metallic, carrying the scent of damp earth. On one wall, a section of brickwork stands out newer, smoother, the mortar pale compared to the crumbling walls around it. Behind it, according to the drawings, there should be a narrow hall running directly beneath the altar. Locals call it times the lower room. Asterisk. None can say what it held. Old workers, those still alive, claim they were instructed never to approach it. One remembered a priest who oversaw repairs in 1950 whispering, asterisk. That door isn't meant for opening. It's meant for keeping shut. Asterisk. The narrator reads from the final entries of the diary, the pages brittle and stained. The voice trembles slightly, as if aware of what lies between the lines. Asterisk. Doctor. Wexler says the voices below are part of the study, that the children hear what we cannot. He calls them resonances, I call them warnings. They hum through the floor at night, like a choir with no breath. Asterisk. The handwriting ends mid-sentence, ink trailing downward as though the writer had been pulled from the page. After that, there are no more words. The researchers press their palms against the sealed wall. The camera microphone picks up only the faint hiss of air moving through cracks, but when the footage is slowed, a low vibration is heard, almost rhythmic, almost human. Could be wind, one of them says, but no one answers. When they shine their light higher, they find a symbol carved into the brick just above head level. Two circles joined by a single line, the same mark that appears in the ledgers beside every trade day. Someone tried to chisel it out, but the impression remains, deep enough to catch dust, like old blood. As the film lingers, the narrator's tone shifts from inquiry to unease. When the orphanage was abandoned in 1952, the corridor was bricked over entirely, not repaired, erased. The state report claims the lower level was flooded and unsafe, but floods recede, and still the wall stands. The camera backs away slowly, the beam trembling. Somewhere behind the sealed doorway, a sound rises faint, distant, like a child's hum echoing through stone. Then silence returns, thick and absolute, as if the building itself is listening for an answer. The photographs from 1948 were discovered in a box sealed with red wax, tucked behind a collapsed cabinet in what had once been the infirmary. Inside, wrapped in brittle newspaper, lay several glass negatives and strips of decayed film labeled simply asterisk, class portraits. Asterisk. When the researchers first developed them, the images appeared ordinary. Rows of children posed stiffly before the orphanage's chapel, hands folded, faces pale in the light. But there was something wrong with the stillness. The longer one stared, the more unnatural it seemed. Their expressions were too fixed, their eyes unfocused, as though they were watching something behind the camera rather than the man taking their picture. The narrator's voice carries a slow, deliberate cadence as the documentary displays each restored photograph in sequence. The first image, they say, shows 15 children in a line. Their shadows fall forward, toward the lens. But there is no visible light source behind them. The second photograph shows the same group, though two faces appear blurred, melted into motion while the rest remain frozen. When enhanced, faint outlines emerge in the space between their shoulders' hands that do not belong to any of the children, reaching upward from below the frame. Some claim it is the effect of aging emulsion or careless exposure. Others notice that the shapes match the height and posture of the missing pairs mentioned in the diary. One image, marked times the 3rd of November 1948, asterisk bears a long tear through the center. Along the edges of the tear, when magnified, the researchers found fine indentations as if small fingers had pressed against the film before it dried. The camera lingers on the detail, the narrator whispering, "Someone touched these before they hardened, someone who shouldn't have been there." In another photograph, the group is gathered around the chapel steps. Behind them, the doorway gapes black. When digital enhancement lightens the shadows, faint silhouettes appear 12 figures standing deep within the dark, their features indistinct, but their eyes reflecting the light like glass. Experts argue that it could be a trick of exposure, a double layering of images. Yet when the negatives are examined under infrared, the hidden figures register at a different depth than the rest, as though they were never captured by the same lens. One historian interviewed in the film recalls hearing from an old priest that Dr. Wexler himself ordered the portraits taken each month. He said they were for progress reports, the man explains, but he always took one photograph, too many one without the children. The final image in the series holds the longest. 21 children this time, standing motionless, each face blurred slightly at the edges, their outlines thinning as though dissolving into air. Between two of them, at the very center, a faint second face appears, overlapping both a child with no recorded name, whose eyes seem to follow the viewer, no matter the angle. The narrator's voice softens into something almost reverent. If these were mistakes, they were deliberate ones. If they were ghosts, they were documented. The film fades to black, leaving only the faint clicking of a film reel turning by itself, as though the photographs were still trying to speak. The footage begins with the crackle of old film, the image slightly overexposed, washed in the yellow tint of age. A woman sits before the camera, her dress neat but dated, her posture rigid despite the years weighing on her shoulders. Her name appears briefly at the bottom of the screen, asterisk asterisk, Margaret Hale, former Caretaker Street. Elora's Orphanage, 1938, 1951. Asterisk, asterisk. Her eyes do not look directly at the interviewer. They hover just to the side, as if something behind the lens unsettles her. The faint sound of a clock ticks in the background. steady and insistent. She clears her throat before speaking, her voice brittle, like old paper tearing. "We were told not to count them at night," she says. The interviewer leans forward, but she continues before any question is asked. "If you counted too high, they would notice." The film pauses there, the audio looping for a moment, as though the editors wanted to be sure the words were heard. The narrator explains that the interview aired once on a small local news channel in 1972, then disappeared from circulation. The network archives show no copy. The footage used in the documentary was found decades later in a private collection, unmarked, the reel mislabeled as Community Fair, 1959. When restored, Margaret's confession stands as the only surviving testimony from a staff member who witnessed Street Elora's final years. In the footage, she describes how the orphanage changed after Dr. Wexler's arrival. "He said he was here to help," she murmurs, "but after he came, we weren't allowed in certain rooms anymore. The basement, the chapel, the nursery after sunset." She presses her trembling hands together, her wedding band dull with tarnish. The children started to speak differently. Sometimes they'd whisper numbers, always numbers, and sometimes the same number would come from more than one mouth. The interviewer asks if she ever understood what those numbers meant. She shakes her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No," she whispers. "Only that when I wrote them down, the count was never the same twice. You'd write 31, and by morning it was 32. Then back again. The doctor said the ledger was wrong. But it wasn't the paper that was wrong, it was the children." The reel flickers. The image warps, as if resisting being seen. Margaret looks past the camera then, her gaze fixed somewhere distant. Her voice drops to a whisper, almost swallowed by static. "Some nights we heard steps in the hall when everyone was asleep. We thought it was the wind or the pipes, but then the voices came. They didn't sound like children anymore." She hesitates, lips trembling. "They sounded like echoes, as if the walls were learning to talk back." The interviewer tries to press further, asks who they were, the ones who noticed when someone counted too high, but Margaret doesn't answer. She simply looks down, folds her hands, and says softly, "We stopped counting altogether after that. It was safer not to know how many were left." The film ends with a click, and for several seconds there is only the hum of the reel spinning empty, like the sound of breath caught between words never finished. The rain began just after dusk, a slow tapping at first, then a relentless drumbeat that turned the orphanage roof into a trembling instrument. Wind clawed through the trees outside, bending the chapel's cross until it groaned. The diary's handwriting, once steady and small, becomes jagged across these pages, the ink bleeding where water must have seeped through the ceiling. The writer's words come faster, more fragmented, as though each line was scratched down between footsteps in the hall. Asterisk. "The storm will drown it out." Asterisk, one entry begins. Asterisk. "Dr. Wexler says the timing is perfect. The wagon came early." Asterisk. The narrator's voice, slow and deliberate, guides us through the words as the camera pans over the original pages, each warped and glistening under the light. The diary's tone shifts from observation to confession, the voice says. The hand trembles, letters loop and break, ink trails downward like tears. The next line reads, asterisk, "Children restless. Crying. Some calling names that aren't their own." Asterisk. The following page is streaked with a brown smear, a palm print pressed into the margin. Then a single phrase written large across the paper. Asterisk. "Do not look when they go." Asterisk. Eyewitness accounts from neighbors recall thunder that night, though the storm seemed to rest only above Street Elora's. One farmer described seeing lights flicker across the chapel windows long after midnight, pale and rhythmic, as if the building itself were breathing. Another claimed he heard singing, a low, steady hum rising from beneath the ground. Inside the orphanage, the diary describes children being roused from their beds and lined up in the corridor. Asterisk. He says it is balance, Asterisk, the writer notes. Asterisk. One in, one out. The count must remain 30. 1. Asterisk. Then comes the line that ends all speculation. Asterisk. We traded Anna yesterday. She didn't scream. She looked relieved. Asterisk. After that, the handwriting stops abruptly. The remaining pages are blank, except for faint indentations where the pen pressed but never drew ink, as if the hand continued to move after the words were gone. The documentary overlays the sound of rain, a child's cry echoing faintly through static. The narrator continues, no records of any wagon were ever found, no deliveries, no departures. Yet, the next month's census lists a new arrival, an unnamed girl, aged 9, replacing Anna's space in the ledger. The camera moves to a photograph taken days later. A group of children stand in the courtyard, their clothes still damp. At the center, a girl faces the lens, her expression calm but vacant. Her tag reads **Hasson 4***, the number that once belonged to Anna. Behind her, barely visible, another figure seems to linger in the rain, faint, translucent, and smiling. The image trembles before fading to black, and the narrator whispers the last words from the recovered diary. She looked relieved. The asylum records from 1956 list her as Times patient 43B female, approximately 15 years of age, found wandering near the railway tracks outside Harrisburg, no known family. No name offered. When questioned, she did not speak, only tilted her head toward the sound of voices, as though listening for something they couldn't hear. The doctor who admitted her wrote that one of her eyes had turned milky white, while the other remained a sharp, unnatural gray. Behind her left ear, burned into the skin, was a mark an intersecting circle and cross, the same symbol carved into the bricks of Street Elora's basement wall. Beneath the intake form, a single note appears, written in blue pencil, **, return to sender, property of Street Elora's, **. The documentary pauses on those words, the narrator's voice soft and measured. No one knows who wrote it, they say, or why a child was labeled as property belonging to a place that had been sealed for 4 years. The camera lingers on the asylum's intake photograph. The girl sits upright, hands folded neatly in her lap, her hair cut short. Her gaze is unfocused, her lips slightly parted as though she might speak, but never does. Over the following weeks, her behavior confounded the staff. She ate little, slept rarely, and hummed constantly under her breath a low, rhythmic melody that nurses described as like 2 voices at once. One attendant recalled entering her room late one night to find her sitting cross-legged on the floor, tracing the shape of her brand in the dust. When asked what she was doing, she raised her good eye toward the ceiling and whispered, 31. It was the only word she ever said. Investigators later compared her photograph to the orphanage's surviving ledgers. Among the faded portraits, they found one that matched her almost perfectly. Anna the child traded the night of the storm. The resemblance was unmistakable. Same scar above the brow, same gray eye, but the timelines refused to align. If it was truly Anna, she would have been far older. Yet the asylum's records listed her age as identical to the day she vanished. As though, the narrator muses, she had stepped out of the ledger without time passing at all. When doctors attempted to treat her, she grew violent, clutching her head and crying out, too many voices. They're still counting, The brand behind her ear began to blister again, as though the burn were fresh. Within a month, she disappeared from the asylum. No record of discharge, no witness to her departure. Only a stain remained on the bedsheet, shaped faintly like a handprint. The film closes the sequence with an image of her intake tag, retrieved from storage decades later. The handwriting is faded, but one phrase remains perfectly legible, return to sender. The narrator lets the silence stretch before the next line, barely a whisper. But no one ever came to claim her. The oral histories collected from the surrounding valley share one constant detail: the nights when the black cars came. Most called them sedans, though a few described long vehicles with mirrored windows and a hum that lingered after the engines stopped. There were never headlights, and no one could recall seeing plates on the bumpers. The cars appeared on the narrow dirt road that wound toward Street Elora's, rolling through fog as if drawn by the building itself. Farmers would wake to the sound of gravel shifting under tires but, by morning, find no tracks on the road. The visits always came during storms or on nights when the moon was hidden, and always in threes. The narrator's voice, low and clinical, recounts the testimonies, while the film shows grainy reenactments, three dark silhouettes stepping from the cars, their shapes barely outlined by lightning. Locals called them the gentlemen, the voice explains. But in the orphanage ledger they were recorded differently. Asterisk agency visitation transfer confirmed. Asterisk no agency is ever named. In the recovered diary, one entry breaks from its usual calm script, written with a shaking hand. Asterisk. The gentleman arrived again tonight. Dr. Wexler met them at the gate. He says we are to show respect, but never to speak first. They bring gifts and take records. They ask for silence more than anything. Asterisk. The page ends with a line written in the margin. Asterisk. They smell of iron and rain. Asterisk. Surviving residents from nearby towns remember seeing faint light through the chapel windows during those visits, pulses of white that came in pairs, followed by darkness. One woman, who had been a girl then, recalled that her father forbade her from walking near the hill after sundown. He said the men in the suits didn't walk right, she told interviewers decades later. Said their steps made no sound. The film shows an archival image, a single sheet of official stationery recovered from the orphanage office, the emblem at the top torn away. Only the closing line remains. Asterisk. Your cooperation ensures continuation of Project E. Maintain equilibrium. Asterisk. No record exists of what Project E stood for. As the narrator reads, the camera pans across the chapel's stone floor, where faint grooves form the outline of tire tracks, preserved in the dust as though pressed into the stone itself. The state claimed no visitors were registered to Street Elora's, the narrator continues. But the diary mentions them 19 times between 1948 and 1951. Each entry coincides with a trade day. The final excerpt from the diary is read aloud. Asterisk. When the gentlemen leave, the air feels wrong. The children do not sleep. They stare toward the gate until dawn, as if expecting someone to return. Wexler calls it adjustment. I call it aftermath. Asterisk. The film fades to black, but faintly, beneath the last note of the soundtrack, there is the distant sound of an idling engine that never quite fades away. The county fire records for the summer of 1950 describe the incident at Street Elora's as a contained smoke event. Contained, such a small word for what the surviving photographs show. The film lingers on the blackened husk of the East Dormitory, its roof half collapsed, its windows warped into long ovals that seem to sag like eyes. The official report claims that only bedding and floorboards were damaged, yet the building's entire east wing was sealed the following week. Brick was laid hastily across the corridor, mortar still visible in photographs taken years later. No one was permitted to enter again. The superintendent's signature on the closure order is smudged, but beneath it, in smaller script, appears another line. Asterisk. Containment achieved. Asterisk. The narrator's voice is calm, clinical. Containment of what, they ask. No cause of ignition was ever recorded, no evidence of lightning, no report of faulty wiring. Witness statements contradict each other. Some claim smoke poured from the dormitory windows, others that it seeped from beneath the doors like breath. A groundskeeper swore the smell lingered for weeks, not of wood or fabric, but of burnt oil and metal. When researchers finally gained access to the sealed wing decades later, the air inside was still acrid. The walls were charred halfway up. and the ceiling bore faint handprints in soot, small and perfectly spaced. But it was the drawings that arrested them most. Across every wall, carved deep into plaster, softened by heat, ran the same repeating pattern rows of circles linked by lines, looping endlessly like a chain. Beneath the pattern, written again and again, the same two words: asterisk, trade path. Asterisk. In the film, the camera glides slowly along those markings, tracing the circles until the pattern begins to blur, hypnotic in its precision. The narrator explains that when the design was digitally reconstructed, the lines formed a spiral that led always back to its center. At that center, carved deeper than anywhere else, lay a single symbol: the intersecting circle and cross. The mark that appeared on the branded child, the mark burned into the ledger, the mark chiseled above the basement door. Local rumor insisted that the fire began in the dormitory's prayer room. One child, they said, had been kept awake by a humming beneath the floor. When she touched the boards, heat bloomed through them as though something below had caught flame. Others whispered that the fire was no accident, that Dr. Wexler ordered the wing burned after the children began drawing the same symbols in their sleep. The diary corroborates this in part. Asterisk. They scratch the pattern even on their skin. Asterisk, the caretaker wrote in a final trembling entry. Asterisk. He says it means the door below is open again. Asterisk. The documentary holds on one last image. The remains of a child's cot fused into the wall, its iron frame warped into a near-perfect circle. Ash drifts in the air like gray snow as the narrator's voice fades. The records say smoke damage only, they whisper. But sometimes smoke is just what's left when something larger tries to hide its shape. The screen goes dark, and the faint outline of the trade path glows for a moment longer, like embers that refuse to die. The reel was found in 1952, hidden in a drawer of the superintendent's desk after the orphanage had already been shuttered. Its label, handwritten in uneven pencil, read only asterisk, bedtime voices. Asterisk. The magnetic tape had begun to decay, its edges curling like burned paper, yet someone had taken care to wind it neatly, as though waiting for it to be heard again. The documentary opens this segment with a slow pan over the recorder, an old Revere reel-to-reel machine, its metal body scarred by rust and fingerprints. Then, the tape begins to play. At first, nothing but static fills the room, a heavy, living kind of noise that seems to pulse rather than hiss. The narrator's voice cuts through it only once, warning softly, "What you are about to hear has been authenticated as original to the Street Elora's collection." For nearly 30 seconds, there is nothing but the hum of interference, a low, oscillating tone, like a machine breathing. Then, faintly, a voice emerges, a child's, distant and small. The syllables are blurred by static, but as the frequency stabilizes, words begin to surface. Asterisk. We trade to keep balance. One in, one out. Asterisk. The tone is neither frightened nor rehearsed. It sounds like recitation, the rhythm of something memorized long ago. Then the hum returns, louder, closer. Beneath it, the faint shuffle of feet. Another voice follows, older, steady, male. He whispers something unintelligible, perhaps an instruction. The child repeats the same phrase, slower this time, the words breaking at the edges. Asterisk. One in, one out. Asterisk. The documentary team ran the audio through spectral filters, isolating layers of sound. When the frequencies above human range were amplified, faint harmonics appeared, voices overlapping, repeating the same words in perfect unison, though only one child had been present. The narrator's tone darkens as the recording continues. At the 20-second mark, they explain, a secondary voice becomes audible. It is not a child. The clip plays again, slowed. Beneath the child's chant, a deeper resonance forms, a man's voice speaking the same phrase, its cadence identical, but pitched an octave lower. Then, abruptly, the tape distorts. The hum spikes into a sharp whine, like metal scraping against glass. There is a sudden intake of breath, a scream, but it does not sound young. It is too guttural, too full. The reel stops there, the tape frayed at the edge as if torn from the machine. Forensic audio experts later confirmed that the final note could not be replicated with any known recording error. It wasn't feedback, it was something else. Something exhaled. The film ends the segment with the recorder still spinning, though the tape has run out. The reels click in rhythm, echoing the child's words long after the sound fades. Asterisk, one in, one out. Asterisk. The camera lingers on the empty spool, and for a moment, faintly, almost inaudibly, the hum returns no longer mechanical, but breathing. The report was written in the winter of 1953 by a state investigator named Harold Kinney, assigned to review the remnants of Street Elora's after its closure. His work was meant to be routine catalog what remained, verify the orphanage's population records, and ensure no dependents were unaccounted for. But his notes, preserved in the state archives under a separate file marked Times Restricted, reveal something else entirely. Discrepancies in facial recognition, he wrote on the first page, his language cautious, clinical. Several children listed by name and birth record appear in photographs with slight but undeniable variations in feature symmetry. In some cases, two or more subjects share identical cranial measurements and bone structure beyond expected genetic similarity. He ended the paragraph with a phrase underlined twice, asterisk, reassessment required. Asterisk. The documentary overlays these words atop a montage of the recovered photographs. The images are black and white, grainy, yet the pattern emerges even through distortion. In group portraits, multiple children possess faces nearly indistinguishable, same arch of brow, same spacing of eyes, same faint dimple beside the mouth. When digitally enhanced, their proportions align perfectly, as if copied from a single template. The effect is subtle, the narrator explains, but cumulative. By the final year of operation, only 5 distinct sets of features appear across 31 children. Kenny's later notes grow less formal. He writes of visiting a surviving caretaker who insisted that none of the children were ever twins. But, she added, sometimes they began to look like one another. You'd glance away, and when you looked back, you'd swear they'd shifted just a little, like the faces were remembering something wrong. Kinney requested fingerprint comparisons, but no prints were on record. The orphanage had destroyed them years earlier under Wexler's supervision. In one photograph dated 1949, 3 boys stand in a row outside the chapel. Their names Peter, Caleb, and Jonah are written beneath in identical handwriting. But when the image is inverted, another faint signature appears in the corner, one that doesn't match any staff member's hand. Asterisk version 3. Asterisk Kinney dismissed it as vandalism, yet filed a private addendum describing his unease. Their eyes are too similar, he wrote. No variance in iris pattern, like the same reflection repeated. The documentary pauses over a final image, believed to have been taken weeks before the orphanage closed. The children stand facing the camera, 31 in total. Their faces, though different by name and age, are arranged with eerie precision symmetrical from one edge of the frame to the other, as though positioned deliberately to mirror one another. It is unclear, the narrator says, whether these were photographs of individuals or documentation of a process. Kinney's last entry ends abruptly. Asterisk. Recommend halting review pending agency authorization. Asterisk, he wrote. Asterisk. Subjects appear replicated beyond plausible explanation. Asterisk. Below that, a smudged fingerprint pressed in ink his own, likely accidental, though some viewers claim it looks identical to one already printed beside a child's name on the preceding page. The frame fades to black before the narrator concludes, almost whispering. In the records, their faces blur together. In memory, they never come apart. The town sits quiet in the valley now, its streets lined with sagging porches and trees that seem to lean inward, as if guarding what little memory remains. Most of the people who lived there during Street Elora's final years are gone, but those who stayed, those old enough to remember, speak of the orphanage's closure with a strange uncertainty, as though the event had been half erased from their minds. They recall the smoke that lingered for days, the faint sound of sirens winding through the hills, but when asked what caused it, they pause, frown, and say the same thing every time. Asterisk. We were told not to ask. The documentary captures their faces in soft, flickering light. Wrinkled hands tremble around cups of coffee as they search for the right words. One man, a retired postmaster, recalls a night when black cars idled at the edge of town. They parked near the courthouse, he says, voice low, and 3 men got out carrying folders. They went into the clerk's office. Next morning, the records room was locked, and when it opened again, the ledgers were gone. Another woman remembers being in school when the teacher gathered the children and said there would be no more collection drives for the orphanage, no more letters. She wrote the name Street Elora's on the blackboard, the woman says, then wiped it clean right after. Told us to forget we'd ever written to them. When researchers later examined local archives, they discovered that newspapers from 1949 to 1951 were missing entire years cut from the record. Microfilm reels jump abruptly from December 1948 to January 1952, with no explanation for the gap. The editor's logs from that period end with a single cryptic note scrawled in red ink. Asterisk. Reprint not authorized under review. Asterisk. The county historian interviewed for the film admits that even government minutes from those years have been altered. Whole meetings gone, he says. Not redacted, just replaced with blank pages. The narrator describes it as a quiet redaction of collective memory. Locals began referring to the orphanage only as Times the place up the hill, asterisk, never by name. The road leading to it, once called Street Elora's Lane, was renamed County Route 11, and over time even the maps dropped its earlier label. The children who had once been sponsored by families in town disappeared from parish lists, their birthdays unacknowledged. It was like someone pulled a thread, the narrator whispers, and the whole memory unraveled. One account stands apart from the others. A former librarian recalls men in dark coats visiting her office, carrying sealed envelopes stamped with a government crest she didn't recognize. They told me to collect every mention of the orphanage newspapers, donation records, photographs, and turn them over. They said it was an official matter. When she hesitated, one of them leaned closer and said, "It's better if no one remembers." She complied. Days later, she found the drawers empty, the files gone, and a faint smell of ozone lingering in the air. In the documentary's closing shot, the camera pans across the abandoned road where the orphanage once stood. The narrator speaks softly, almost to themselves. The town did not forget by neglect. It forgot by design. And whatever was written into those papers, whatever was erased from their minds, it worked. Ask them now what street Elora's was, and they will tell you only this: it's gone, and it should stay gone. The diary emerged from the walls almost by accident. In the spring of 1984, a construction crew began renovating what remained of the old courthouse annex in Clearfield County. Behind a false panel sealed with aging plaster, they discovered a small lockbox, the kind once used for ledgers or cash. It was rusted shut, its hinges melted to a dull brown. Inside, wrapped in what looked like the remains of an orphanage bedsheet, lay a weathered leather journal. The inscription on its inside cover was faint but legible. Asterisk, property of Street Elora's home for Foundlings. Asterisk, the year, 1950. When archivists at the State University examined it, they realized what they had found. The missing diary, long whispered about in fragments of the investigation, referenced but never seen, had returned. But it wasn't whole. Entries numbered 32 through 40 had been torn or fused together by a thick residue, brown and stiff like dried blood or varnish. The surviving pages, though brittle, carried the same cramped handwriting found in the earlier excerpts. The first legible line following the damaged section reads, Asterisk. They say it is over, but the numbers don't end. Asterisk. The documentary pans across the preserved pages, each word illuminated by soft archival light. The narrator's voice trembles with restraint. The diary was found intact, but altered, they explain. As though time itself tried to consume what it recorded. Entry #41, the last full entry, bears the tone of a confession. The writer speaks of silence in the dormitories, of beds left unmade, and of the chapel door that no longer needs to be locked. There is mention of the gentlemen again, though now they are described not as visitors, but as keepers, custodians of something the author no longer names. The handwriting grows erratic near the end, the ink smearing into the edges of the page. The final legible line before the text dissolves reads, Asterisk, the last one left was not Anna. Asterisk. Researchers debated the meaning for years. Some claimed it was a simple error, the author mistaking the identity of the final child removed before the orphanage's closure. Others argued it suggested substitution, that Anna had been replaced long before the final trade. When ultraviolet light was applied to the stained pages, ghost lines appeared, half sentences invisible to the naked eye. One of them read, Asterisk. The faces don't match the names anymore. Asterisk. Another, fragmented beyond clarity, included the word asterisk, return, asterisk. The narrator pauses over that word as the film cuts to footage of the diary's current resting place in a climate-controlled archive, sealed behind glass. Its pages flicker under low light, as if the ink itself is restless. What was written between entries 32 and 40 remains unknown, the narrator says softly. What was erased may have been the reason the orphanage burned. In the final seconds of the sequence, the camera lingers on the diary's closing line times. The last one left was not Anna. Asterisk. The hum of static begins to swell beneath the narrator's final words. If that was true, then who was? The excavation began as a matter of preservation, not revelation. In 1992, a historical society petitioned to restore what was left of Street, Elora's chapel, a shell of stone and ivy that had stood untouched for nearly half a century. The plan was simple: stabilize the structure, document what remained, and perhaps open the site as a memorial. No one expected to find a room that had never appeared on any blueprint. The discovery came when a graduate student noticed an anomaly in the foundation, an echo that lasted a second too long when she struck her hammer against the floor. Beneath the chapel's altar, they found a section of marble that sounded hollow. Within a week, permission was granted to excavate. What they uncovered silenced the crew. Beneath 2 feet of stone and dust lay a sealed corridor leading to a chamber no larger than a classroom. The air inside was stale, the walls lined with soot as though a lamp had burned endlessly and gone out. Along the edges of the room stood 12 narrow beds, their frames welded into the floor. Rusted chains dangled from each, some broken, some still latched. At the center, a wooden post bore marks that could have been from restraints, though none remained. But what struck investigators most were the shoes, dozens of them arranged carefully at the foot of each bed, paired as if awaiting their owner's return. The documentary lingers on those shoes. Scuffed leather, buckles tarnished with age, some so small they could fit in the palm of a hand. Children's shoes, the narrator says quietly. 12 pairs, all different sizes, none belonging to any recorded orphan. Beneath them, fragments of name tags were found, each labeled with a number instead of a name. Numbers 21 through 32, though the orphanage's official registry listed only 20 children during that period. Forensic testing followed. DNA samples were taken from bone fragments discovered near the drain at the back of the room. The results were inconclusive at first, then unsettlingly precise. None of the remains matched any child listed in the orphanage's official files. The genetic markers didn't correspond to known family records anywhere in the region. No registered births, no missing persons, no match at all, the report concluded. Subjects do not exist in the state's genealogical database. The documentary cuts to footage of the excavation site at night, floodlights throwing long shadows against the chapel's cracked walls. The lead archaeologist, her face drawn with exhaustion, speaks softly into the camera. They weren't buried. They were kept. Among the artifacts recovered was a small metal tag fused to the floor beside one bed. It bore the same symbol found throughout the orphanage, the intersecting circle and cross, and beneath it, the number 31, engraved deep enough to survive the decades. The camera closes in, the sound fades to a low hum, and the narrator's final words echo through the static. 12 beds, 12 pairs of shoes, but 13 numbers carved into the floor. Someone else had been here, and someone never left. The page was discovered by accident, decades after the diary itself had been catalogued and sealed away. In 2006, when archivists prepared the street, Elora collection for digital preservation, one of them noticed a faint outline tucked between the back cover of the ledger and the protective binding. It was thin, almost translucent, and fused to the paper by time. When lifted free, it revealed a single page, no date, no entry number, only handwriting unmistakably identical to the matron's, slanted, careful, and ending every word with a faint downward stroke. At the top, written in fading black ink, was the final line anyone would ever find from Street Elora's. Asterisk. We traded ourselves. Balance restored. Asterisk. The film opens the chapter in silence, showing that sheet under magnification. The narrator's voice enters softly, nearly reverent. For years, they explain, historians wondered whether the diary's author survived the orphanage's last night. This single sentence may be her confession or her surrender. The ink analysis confirmed that the page was written with the same fountain pen used throughout the diary, but the composition of the paper didn't match any found within the original book. It was older, handmade, closer to the parchment used for administrative records. Experts argued she must have torn it from an official ledger before hiding it inside her own. The words themselves became an obsession among researchers. Some read them as metaphor the matron, consumed by guilt, writing that she and the staff had become complicit in the exchanges, figuratively trading their humanity to preserve the institution. Others saw something literal in it, a final act of ritual. In the diary's earlier entries, the matron often referred to the balance as sacred, necessary, non-negotiable. To her, trade was not transaction, it was law. One in, one out, the children had whispered. Perhaps, the narrator suggests, when there were no more outsiders to give, the staff fulfilled their own vow. Handwriting experts noted subtle differences in pressure. The letters toward the end of the sentence tremble, as if written by a hand losing strength. Microscopic scans revealed faint smears around the ink, traces of oil and protein consistent with human tears. One analyst remarked that whoever wrote it was not documenting, but finishing. The camera returns to the ledger itself, open on a table under dim light. The faint echo of turning pages is the only sound. On the last recorded line of the official register, an unnumbered entry appears in red pencil, barely visible until the archivists enhanced the image. It reads simply, staff count, 0. The narrator's voice drops to a whisper. If she survived, there would be evidence, letters, testimony, a burial. There is none. Only her words, hidden where no one was meant to find them. The orphanage kept its balance, even at the cost of the people who guarded it. The final shot shows the lone page encased behind glass, the phrase illuminated by a sliver of reflected light. For a moment, the ink seems to shimmer, as if wet again. Then the screen fades to black, leaving only her final sentence suspended in the dark. Asterisk, we traded ourselves, balance restored, asterisk. The documentary's final sequence opens with the camera gliding through the woods where Street Elora's once stood. The ground is uneven now, swallowed by moss and wild briar, but the path to the orphanage gate remains faint, persistent, as though the earth itself remembers where it led. A rusted signpost leans in the overgrowth, the paint long stripped away, leaving only the outline of its letters. *SEH*. The narrator speaks over the soft hiss of wind. They closed the orphanage in 1951, but paper does not burn as easily as wood, and records are patient things. Inside the archives, the camera lingers on a wall of boxes labeled Times Street, Elora's home, pending classification. Asterisk. Each box holds copies of the ledger pages, fragments of correspondence, and anonymous reports written by hands that have since vanished. None are marked complete. Every attempt to finalize the collection, the narrator explains, has been interrupted, funding withdrawn, permissions revoked, inventories lost. It's as if something refuses conclusion. In one shot, a clerk opens the latest census list. The column for times deceased times remains blank, its lines waiting for names that never arrived. Those who visit the grounds speak of strange persistence. Batteries drain faster near the chapel, compasses stutter. Audio recorders pick up a low hum even when no wind moves. One historian describes the sensation of being counted, though by what or by whom she cannot say. Locals avoid the property after dusk, but some confess they've heard faint voices near the iron gate, children reciting names, one after another, never repeating. The list, they claim, grows longer each year. The film cuts to aerial footage, the outline of the orphanage foundation forming a perfect rectangle around the chapel's ruins. Within it, grass refuses to grow evenly, the pattern curling inward like a spiral. Closure, the narrator says, was the state's word, but in every record the orphanage behaves as if it never stopped operating. Inspections scheduled, inventories updated, signatures dated years beyond the fire, a system still turning long after its hands are gone. The final minutes play without music. The narrator walks the audience through the remaining evidence: birth records without death certificates, case files listing children who were never born, and reports stamped times balance maintained. Asterisk. Somewhere, the voice murmurs, between Mercy and Memory Street. Elora's remains open its roll call unfinished, its trades unbalanced. The camera drifts toward the gate one last time, its hinges trembling faintly though no one touches them. Beyond it, the valley exhales. The trees sway in rhythm to a sound that could be wind or could be whispering. Then, in the quiet between frames, a voice, small, distant, and almost kind, calls a name that doesn't appear in any ledger. Another follows, then another, each one spoken as if checking attendance. The screen fades to black. The narrator's final words are barely audible, carried on the hum that has haunted the story from the beginning. The orphanage closed, they whisper, but its record never did. And if you listen near the gate after dark, the wind still calls names that were never crossed out.